So Great and Powerful is a brony musician from the early 2010s known for a weird, soulful, pseudo-orchestral pop production style and a love of math and abstract philosophy. He was never too open about his musical influences, but there's a lot of Destroyer, Amiga chiptunes, Kate Bush, Fleet Foxes, Panda Bear, and even Mad Villain in his music. But as a whole, his style is completely alien even when compared to those artists. Not helping is the fact that a few years after he started, he'd disappeared completely, only occasionally reappearing to put out a couple songs and then disappear again for years at a time. Now, when something seems inimicable, unique, whatever, that kind of inherently makes you want to try and deconstruct it, right? It's one of those human things we learn very early on, starts out as curiosity, and depending on what it's about, it evolves over our lives into theory, or it's science, or some in between. When I heard So Great and Powerful and his incredible, distinct style, something made me want to take it apart, maybe just so I could get more out of the limited sets of songs he'd come out with. Or maybe just so that I could incorporate into my own art some of the feelings he evoked. So one afternoon I had the idea to sit down and just take some notes, use what I knew of ear training and dictation to figure out what makes his music so SGaP-ish. Now we're going to be getting into some marginally complicated music theory in this. I'm expecting you understand at least a little bit about harmony in music. I'm expecting you to know what diatonic and chromatic mean, what major and minor are, how they're related, what chords are, what extensions are. Not anything too advanced. We're not getting into the circle of fifths or classical forms or anything like that. Basically just what you'd end up knowing if you'd studied some basic music theory, gone on HookPad and messed around with stuff, you know. The core of SGaP, the most important aspect, is that he is categorically intensely opposed to dissonance. Not even like the sort of dissonance that's considered acceptable in pop music, like diminished or dominant seventh chords. SGaP's music is often incredibly complicated and layered, but it never even approaches being anything but lushly consonant. It's always diatonic, or in the key. Like, for simplicity, your faithful student is in C major, which means it only uses white keys. While some pop songs might borrow some accidentals for flavor, SGaP would never risk the possible resulting dissonance. He always stays in key, which makes everything kind of resonant. That being said, he avoids classical cliches a lot too. So, let me explain something. This is a bit of a tangent, but I swear I'm coming back to this. SGaP has no interest in musical resolutions, and I'm not talking about his song's tendency to end suddenly. So, if you've done music theory classes, you probably already know all of this, but there are kind of these functions that certain chords in a key are used for. There's the tonic, which is a sort of home base that you start and end on. There's the dominant, which has a lot of notes that are kind of tense, close to notes in the tonic, but not quite there yet. It's a chord that wants the tonic to happen after it. Then there's the subdominant, which doesn't feel stable like the tonic, and also doesn't feel unstable like the dominant. It's just kind of floaty. The name subdominant strictly refers to the fourth chord in the key, but functionally pretty much every chord that isn't dominant or tonic feels the same way as the subdominant, i.e. not building to the tonic like the dominant and not home like the tonic. Most classical music follows the formula of tonic, subdominant, dominant, tonic. It's almost always more complicated than that. Often it will tease you and mess with you by delaying the dominant or delaying the tonic where you expect it. That's how very traditional functional harmony keeps itself going longer than 3 chords over and over. There tends to be that end goal, long term, of arriving at the dominant and then the tonic. This is called a perfect cadence. I'm not getting into cadences here, they're their own deal, they'd be like a 10-minute explanation on their own. However, most pop music, especially pop music influenced by jazz, does not follow these rules. Instead, pop is extremely subdominant focused, frequently not even bothering with a dominant chord except in passing. SGaP is a great example of this, because with the exception of collaborations where the chords were written by other people, he puts an incredible amount of effort into never using the dominant chord. Even when the bass is playing on what would be the root of the dominant chord, the chord above the bass is a distinctly undominant sounding one. For instance, here's the original Pinkie Pie square chord progression to Flutter Wonder. The second chord is the dominant, going up to the third chord, the tonic, kinda, it's complicated. compare this to the SGaP chord progression to Flutter Wonder, which messes with and harmonizes its chords a lot to make them both more harmonically complicated and as undominant as possible. That leads us to the other thing that makes SGaP sound like he does, chord extensions. That's right, we're getting jazzy here. Chord extensions are another thing that's pretty rare in traditional harmony. Usually it's only one kind of chord extension, and it's an extremely dominant sounding one. You are never going to hear anything that dominant or dissonant in an SGaP song. Instead, he extends chords very subdominantly, very undissonantly. He only extends them using notes that are in the key to never ever leaves the key. So there we go. Oftentimes the starting point of writing a song is coming up with a chord progression. So now we know some tips for writing an SGaP-like chord progression. 1. Never ever leave the key. 2. Avoid traditional tonic, subdominant, dominant, tonic, functional harmony. And 3. Extend your chords. Okay, so you know the role the bass plays in music, right? Even if the notes above it are the same, it gives context to what those notes mean. For instance, here's a C major chord. Here's an A minor 7th chord. Nothing changed between those chords but the bass note, but they definitely sound different. So we know the bass is important, but there's more to the bass than defining what chord's going on. It turns out the bass only needs to play the root note of the chord occasionally for you to know what chord is currently happening. So that leaves a lot of space for the bass line to go a little wild. What's even going on there? Does anyone know? So that kind of melody in the bass is extremely important to the SGaP style, because our guy loves to put as many melodies as he possibly can into his songs. Not just on the bass. At times it's not even super clear what chord's going on at a given point. The stacked melodies are really thought out and nice sounding too. Notice how they never clash or go over each other. They're never dissonant with each other. They're never playing the same rhythm at once. They just interweave beautifully. Sometimes one melody stops to make room for another one on a different instrument. It's like really complicated choir music. This is more of a songwriting or arrangement flourish. SGaP, particularly in his vocal post-standard model work,
I know I'm using What Went Wrong as an example for this, don't worry about it.
Retains musical interest through extremely copious use of breakdowns, kind of like dub. A section of his song will begin with repeats of intense rhythmically interlocking layers, complex percussion, and huge chords. Then all but a few will drop out or be replaced, leaving nice empty spaces. This is the opposite of your typical EDM build-up, where layers are slowly added one by one as the song progresses. SGaP is a weird and distinct artist. All of these are, frankly, bizarre habits. And this isn't even going into the sound design aspect of it, which isn't really my forte, that's for someone else to make a video about. He totally understood what he liked in music, and threw all of it into his own music. This is why we learn theory. This is why we learn ear training. This is why we learn to tear apart and analyze the art we love. Because SGaP got all those tricks from somewhere. He didn't come up with them himself. It's a combination of all of them from all those disparate sources at once that makes him so completely unique. If you've ever wondered whether it was worth it to study something as complex and idiosyncratic as music theory, here's your reason why. So that you can take something from everything you love and create something that's yours and nobody else's. Take everything you like and throw it all together and make all your art a self-portrait. No one else can do it but you. Become the best artist you possibly can. Become your own new favorite artist. If you're waiting for a sign, this is it. To conclude things, here's a track I made using these techniques I observed.